UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jenn Durrell.
Well, hey, baby.
Well, hey, baby.
Welcome back to Talking Weird. We missed you last week.
I know. I hate that I missed it.
Well, we had the great Doug Highcheck on, one of my favorite guests ever. I'm such an incredible fanboy of Monster Quest. So's my daughter. I only let her watch the not too scary ones, like because she's into dinosaurs and things like that. We'll always watch the lake monster ones and the Mekele Mbembe, the brontosaurus that supposedly lives in the Congo. And what else do we watch? The Ropens, which are like the pterodactyl type creatures, which are still meant to live in Papua New Guinea. So all the Thunderbird ones. So, and she digs it so much. Such a great show. In fact, it's the only show I think you can still watch years later. I think In Search Of, maybe Unsolved Mysteries and Monster Quest, but certainly the only shows I revisit are Monster Quest, which I watch all the time again and again and again, and Leonard Nimoy vehicle In Search Of, which is you can still watch 50 years for 40 something years later. It's so good. Yeah. But we were waiting for our guest, and unfortunately, he hasn't appeared, which isn't the first time that there's, been a mix-up or a misunderstanding with time zones. But we'll chat. Hopefully, he'll jump in. I wanted to ask you because you missed not only the Doug Highcheck episode, you missed the Jason McLean episode, who was also a fantastic guest, and you missed that one.
Yes, I know.
Because the night before, you'd been on a paranormal investigation, and you had some problems perhaps with an attachment, so you couldn't do the McLean episode. Can you give us any of the details?
Well, I don't know if it was an attachment per se. I'm very sensitive when I get into locations like that, so I absorb a lot of it. And there is a actual thing known as a paranormal hangover, so I tend to get them pretty bad. But I did have something happened when I went to the basement of the house. Something came over to the side of my head. It's all kind of documented. I actually saw it. I was watching my video playback and it's on there. And something kind of touched the back of my head, but when it did it, my head went numb and I went forward and I felt like I was going to pass out, but it just kept messing with me the whole time. And it was when that was going on, they were still getting readings in front of me. So it wasn't just me that was feeling it. They had electrical things going off too at the same time.
Huh. I'd love to see that video.
So, yeah, I'm not the best at holding a camera straight like I should. So I don't know how good it's going to be, but I will try to load it. Later on, when I went upstairs, I was just kind of like in a daze because we had breaks in between and I didn't know where everybody was at, but I still just kind of roamed around the house for a while. And then I had to sit down and take a minute. And I remember sitting down in one room, and actually the room that I sat in has a rocking chair in it that the previous owner supposedly passed away in. And I was just sitting there trying to just get my bearings back because I just did not feel right. And the lady that was in the dining room kept staring at me, but I wasn't thinking much of it because I wasn't really all that with it. And I went back in there and she said, "Oh, was that you sitting in there?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, it's really odd. I just thought you were a little girl. You kept forming into a little girl. And then you have like a bow on your head."
Weird.
And so I was a little shocked by that. I said, nope, it was me. So I'm kind of interested to know what exactly she was seeing me form into. And then later on, I went down there again and found Katie down there and saw that they were getting some activity. So I was just kind of hanging out with her. And we went into one room back there and something kept touching me the whole time. So, I could have had something that followed me home. It kind of felt like something followed me home. So, but it didn't stay.
Did you have to do anything?
Yes, I don't think so.
Did you have to do anything for it to go, or did it just go by itself?
I didn't do anything. I really didn't. There's so many things you're supposed to do after you come back from investigation. Before an investigation, I didn't follow any of it, and I should have. But I haven't noticed anything. So,
David just asked, where was this investigation?
Oh, this was at the McIntyre Villa in Atchison, Kansas. Very good location.
Have you got another investigation planned anytime in the near future?
I was thinking about that, though. Like this month, I should go to another place. But I haven't done it yet.
Bring another demon child home with you. What could go wrong?
I hope not.
Gosh. I had a weird little synchronicity yesterday I might as well talk about, because it was...
yes.
Yeah, did you... you probably saw my Facebook post. I'm sure some other people
I did see something about that.
Are friends with mine on Facebook. My little daughter, 6-year-old, is really into hummingbirds at the moment. Like, she loves hummingbirds, and we watch hummingbird documentaries, and we talk about hummingbirds, and she wants to hear stories about hummingbirds. And I was making pipe cleaner hummingbird toys for her. She asked me, I'd already made a couple, and she asked me to make another one yesterday morning. It was the first thing she almost wanted to do. We hadn't even properly started the day. We'd probably only been up for an hour or two. Like, we hadn't done anything yet. And she asked me to make a pipe cleaner hummingbird for her. So I'd made the hummingbird. She was standing next to me, watching intently while I was making it at the kitchen table. I made it and I gave it to her, and she was kind of admiring it, even though it really, to be honest, wasn't that impressive. But that's the wonderful thing about little kids. They can take joy in all kinds of simple things. And I handed it to her. She's looking at, and then there's this ting noise in the window, which is about 4 feet from where I was sitting and where she was standing.
Yeah.
Anyway, she looks at me because she hears. I'm like, oh, a tree might have dropped a stick. It might have blown into the house, or maybe a bird hit the side of the house. Yeah. So she runs over to the window and looks out and starts jumping up and down, all excited, like super excited, just saying, it's a hummingbird, it's a hummingbird. And sure enough, I walked over and looked out. There's this little stunned hummingbird laying on its back, kind of vibrating, and then it popped around to kind of sit up straight. And I took a photo of it, and through the window, it was a terrible kind of poorly exposed photo, and I ran out to get another photo of it and to check if it was okay, and it just took off and buzzed away. But the chances of a hummingbird flying into the side of my window 4 feet from myself and my daughter just after I've made a hummingbird toy, I mean, the odds of that are statistically ridiculous. And that's why it's a synchronicity. It's a meaningful coincidence. I'm not sure what it means, but it could have been in a Jung book. Jung used to write about those type of synchronicities, things which seem to have, some type of deeper meaning. But I love it when
it's like
a
connection.
Maybe.
And manifestation.
Exactly. I had another one just now with you, just while we were running a little bit late live, other than we were waiting for the guest. I literally started to say to you, my cat might come back, Valet. My cat's named after one of my favorite authors, Jacques Valet, I guess, because cats are cool and the French are kind of cool. So I named him after a French author. Anyway, he's been gone for over 24 hours. I was getting a little bit worried, but I mean, we live in a rural wooded area and he goes off hunting and stuff, but he normally comes back. He normally hunts overnight, comes back in the morning. And he hadn't been back. And I was about to tell you, if we go live and my cat starts banging on the front door, I'm going to have to let it into the garage where its food is. And just as I started to say it, I hadn't even finished the sentence. The cat banged on, as it does, it climbs up the screen door, so it bangs and lets me know. Sure enough, Valet was back. And I was just saying, if the cat comes, boom. So 2 synchronicities in as many days, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's always cool when that happens.
Yeah, it's nice to see Shane Edwards join us. Hey, Shane, how are you doing? And I didn't say hello. You said you flashed up some of the hellos there.
Oh, yeah, I was just putting some up.
David and Ed and Ken, which are always great to know, are here with us. Scotty's here with us as well, which is awesome. Joe Fox. Hello, Joe. Thank you for joining. It's wonderful to have everybody here. But yeah, I'm not sure if our guest is going to join now, as it's almost 1:15. So who knows? Anyway, let's keep chatting about weirdness. We were going to be talking tonight a little bit about demonology and exorcism, because that was the guest's that's his background, or what he does.
It's a hot topic there.
It is a hot topic. And then you were talking to me about, you're pulling out some of your books on demonology or angelology and saying that you'd had, I don't know if you can talk about it, I think it was a family member who'd been involved in some kind of church which did
Well,
their own exorcisms, and you said she'd actually seen some of the beings when you showed them pictures in the book. When you showed her pictures in the book, is that right?
yeah, I mean, with my family, Baptist and all, it was really hush hush for the longest time, and I never could figure out why everybody's like, "Oh, we're not going to talk about it." So later on, after everything, after they left this church that they were involved in, um, I was told more about it. So I they were exorcising demons, and Baptists don't normally do that kind of thing. So um, they ended up leaving that church, but I ended up rooming with this family member later on. And at the time, I was very interested in angels, and I had a little book on fallen angels, and it seemed to bother her that it was in the home. And she told me a little more what had gone on, and I found it fascinating. So I asked her more questions and asked her if she could at least, she wouldn't say the names, which I didn't know at that time why you couldn't say the name. So I asked her if she could at least point to the picture, and she pointed to a few of them, and she said she actually saw them. So that was kind of a question I was going to ask the bishop if he came on, which I will ask him if he does end up showing up, about if that's normal to actually see them during a session like that.
Well, you saw something demonic once yourself, which was masquerading.
Mm-hmm.
You said as your
I've had a lot of
grandfather.
tricksters. Mm-hmm.
What happened with
I've
what
had.
happened? Tell the
Well, no,
grandpa
I mean,
story.
well, the first thing that happened to me that I thought was a little evilish or tricksterish. I was dealing with some issues around that time. I would say I was drinking a little too much and had some depression going on, and I had my own rituals about when I went to sleep, because I had a lot of problems with nightmares and things as I was growing up. So I would always sleep towards the door. I never had my back facing the door, and so I was aware when I woke up that I turned my back to the door. But I went to sleep anyways because I was comfortable. And I felt something lean on the side of my pillow and go right in and whispered in my ear. And I can't remember exactly what it said. I remember the next day I told my mom, this is what it said. Don't forget it, because I will. That's just how my brain works. And she doesn't remember it now. So none of us remember. But it was more of the line of, now I've got you. That kind of thing. So I was about 20, 21 when that happened. So the other story that you're referencing was when I was doing readings a lot. So I was probably about 25. And I had somebody in there that was a skeptic. So it was very hard for me to concentrate. I was getting a bit frustrated because everything I said, she would just blow it off and say something rude. So I started picking up on a man and a young little girl, and I thought maybe it was for my friend that was there. Well, nothing was making sense. I was getting really frustrated. I was getting Bible verses. A lot of them were for Corinthians, which I thought was odd. And once I kind of figured out what it was, it made me think of my grandfather and my aunt that I never met, because she passed away when she was 7. So as I saw that picture, I was really upset, and I'm like, oh, I'm reading myself or something. And so I just ran down the stairs. I was really upset. And as I went downstairs, I saw a picture of my grandfather and envisioned him standing there. And then all of a sudden I heard this little ornery laugh, evil ornery laugh. And his face started to melt. And there was this being. And it's just kind of like what you would see as a picture of one of those entities. It was actually red-skinned, everything. And I just thought it was funny.
Did it have horns?
So,
like that tradition when you say it looked like one
I
of those
actually
entities?
drew it. Anytime I had something weird like that, I would try to draw it. So I have it somewhere.
Yeah, you should dig it out so we can show it in an episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you doing any I know you said you were doing readings, but that sighting including the previous one when something whispered in your ear, were you involved in other aspects of the paranormal then? Were you like doing any seances, or were you investigating
I've
anything,
never
or?
done a seance. Mm-mm. No, I was just always curious about it. I always had a knowing of things, and a lot of that would get me in trouble. I had a lot of chaos and drama around me at that time because I would go with my instinct and I would say things that I probably shouldn't have said, and then drama would start. So, uh, yeah. So I was kind of like the perfect mess for that to be attracted to me back then. So
That kind of raises the question too, whether it's somehow an externalization of your own psychic out of balance energies, or your own psyche having troubles, or whether you're actually attracting something external to you.
I would say I was attracting something. Yeah, no, I was very dark then. So I was attracting that. By the age of 25, I was not into any of that. I mean, I had grown up and was wanting more peace in my life and wasn't, attracted to chaos, and everything had changed. So having that encounter again was upsetting to me because I wasn't trying to do anything bad, and I wasn't trying to, I was actually thought I was helping people. So kind of backfired a little bit.
But even when you weren't involved at all, really, like by the time you were married and living on the farm, you still seem to be attracting
It's everywhere.
things.
I can't get rid of it. I don't want to say anything about my boss, but I don't know how many times today he told me we had some weird things happen. And he's just like, if that happens again, Jen, you're fired. He's just joking. He's like, what? Just electrical things, weird things happen when I'm around.
You also did somewhat of not a full scale investigation, but you did a bit of an investigation at your place of work, right? Do you think did that trigger anything or make anything more? Did it make the site more active, the historic location you work at, or?
No, my goal of that is not really to investigate like people investigate locations. Mine is to prove that it is placed memory and a residual haunt, if anything. I don't think there's any intelligence behind it. The building and the ground that it sits on is on a bluff. Everything just surrounded in limestone. So, limestone, has got quartz in it. And there's another thing too that's a conductor for residual and any type of place memory is I want to say it right, magtite. It's where you get the magnetic field. It's a type of rock. So I don't know if that's in the formations or not. That's inside of the bluff and the cave that's actually underneath his house. But I am trying to research that more just to see if it is a perfect combination of things to constantly play back. There it is. Correct one. Thank you. I think that was David, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that word.
I guess it kind of begs the question then again, all these things do is if something happens because of some type of electromagnetic anomaly caused by minerals in the ground, then is that attracting things or facilitating things, or is it a different phenomena entirely to say if somebody sits in a haunted house and talks into a spirit box and gets a reaction or gets a reading off an EMF reading
Right.
or meter or something? Are they different? Do you think they're different phenomena, or do you think it's just different ways of accessing the same? Or?
I think it's different ways of accessing. If you think about the Bermuda Triangle, for one, it's got a magnetic field there as well. So it just depends on the frequency, how strong it is. Because even when planes are going through Bermuda Triangle, like air traffic control will see them. And then the next minute they can't see them. And it fluctuates, at least over there. And I'm sure that's with any type of location, but especially there. And you have down, what is it Dave said, and water. And it's true. We have where I work at, water is underneath the bluff. We have caves. And so there is a water under at least one portion of the locations. Good conductor.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's also weird though that I can't remember. I heard somebody comment about this recently, and it's so true. Might have even been a guest on our show, but I think I might have heard it a few times. It seems that when people normally see or encounter ghosts, they always seem to be from a much older time. Like nobody's really seeing ghosts wearing, 80s clothes and bebopping with, headsets on and things. It normally seems to be older. Is that something you find?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like you don't see a ghost from the 90s very often or from the 2000s. It seems to be normally the classic ghost is something like from the 19th century, like from the era of the house that you work into, previously. Or is that just, do you think that's just
I think it just depends on
real?
where you're investigating, because a lot of the hospitals, you'll find stuff like that.
You mean you'll find newer ones? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like whatever decade. It just depends on the location. But it is true. It is usually ancient or older things that you see. So
one has to wonder if that becomes some kind of cultural phenomenon then. It's the same way as, say, stories of the other crowd or the fair folk, when it's often that, they were seen more in my grandparents' day. They were seen more by the older generation. And when people see them still, they tend to be dressed in, more an older period's kind of clothing. Mind you, perhaps ETs are just the fair folk, and then they're dressed in a very contemporary, clothing with silver jumpsuits and things. But usually there are many of there are various things in the paranormal where they tend to look like they belong to an older time. Ghosts, fair folk, two examples. There are probably many more.
Yeah, and I think it's also what they choose to portray to you too. So. But yeah, I guess it depends on the location. But I mean, the land's really old, so you just really never know what you're going to find, because it doesn't have to be like an actual human spirit. It could be any type of other spirit that's presenting himself a certain way, which find, human spirits that will present themselves as demonic when they're really not. You just kind of have to decipher between the two and figure it out.
Well, that comes back to your trickster point before. You've got to wonder how much of all of these phenomena, whether it's ghosts or the fair folk or extraterrestrials or Bigfoot, how much of it is presenting itself as it actually is. I do a little sideshow now on the Talking Weird channel on YouTube called My Weird Library. And the last one I did was the wonderful book, The Crypto-Terrestrials, by the late Mac Tunney's, it was published posthumously. And he suggested that, that, as the title suggests, crypto-terrestrials, that there might be something living amongst us instead of living, millions of light years away and traveling here, that these things we see as ETs might be some type of race or species that's humanoid but not human, that's always lived next to us, perhaps like the fair folk or the fairies, for example, but that they intentionally present themselves as extraterrestrial now because that's what obviously fits in, what I mean? Like if you have an encounter, you're more likely today, if you see a little man at the end of your bed, it's probably true. I mean, it seems to be the case anyway in the stories you read. It seems more likely to be an extraterrestrial than something that looks like a fairy, but that's a very literal interpretation of what I'm getting at. People like John Keel and Jacques Vallée and Patrick Harper and Keith Thompson, there's lots of authors who've suggested that whatever this thing is, it might be bound by cultural expectations. So it tends to appear to us the way that we expect it to appear. And that might be the same as spirits. Maybe we expect when there's a haunting, although Ken Rock commented a minute ago, he's seen spirits from the 40s at the factory he works. But even that now, the 40s used to seem not that long ago when I was a little boy, because my grandparents used to talk about it. But now the 40s, I mean, we're getting close to it being a century away. It's 80 years away anyway. Even that's an old period. So maybe when we see spirits, we expect them to look like they're from a period in the past, or at least the distant past. We don't expect them to
Yeah.
look like somebody who passed away yesterday or a year ago
Yeah.
or even
Well,
a decade ago.
you're even lucky to see an apparition, though. That's like once in a lifetime thing for anybody. So I guess that's just whatever TV or whatever show you've watched where you've seen it's more of the older generations. But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't like seen an actual full apparition. I just have visions in my head, and I see the spirits that way.
Or
What are you trying to put up? I missed it.
I'm sorry, I clicked on it twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Or
something.
they expect us. Yeah.
Well, David says he's seen several ghosts. I think I've heard other people who've seen more than one apparition as well.
Well, the more you are around it, you're more able to definitely see it. And he said he grew up in a haunted house, so there you go.
And maybe he's more sensitive as well. I think, again, sometimes some people go a whole life with almost no paranormal experience. And some people, you included, Jen, can tell several different stories about strange lights, about shadow entities, about weird experiences in dreams, about, all these kind of anomalous experiences. Well, some people just don't have any. I mean, I have, as I've talked about, I won't talk about it at length now. I've had experiences as a child that might or might not have been some type of, sleep paralysis or, dreamlike state or something, but I haven't spent a lot of my life being haunted by these things. I mean, occasionally some things happen that you can write off and you're never sure. Like they're more the experiences I get. Like I was briefly on the Area 1051 show today out of Dr. Destruction show, which is fantastic, out of down Walkershore way, which I do occasionally. And Dr. Destruction always asks me if I've had any strange experiences lately. And recently I woke up in the middle of the night to this banging sound, like really loud banging sound. I might have told it on the show briefly before, but I'll tell it again now in case anybody didn't hear it. I mean, it woke me. It was loud enough. It sounded like somebody was trying to get into the house. And I thought maybe that's my cat trying to get into the front door. Because like before the show, I said before he was banging on the front door, but it just was very loud. So I grabbed, a handgun and I grabbed a flashlight just in case. I went to the kitchen because that's where, goes out to the front door where I thought it might have been coming from. And when I walked into the kitchen, it was in an interior wall, which actually is between the kitchen and the mudroom. So it wasn't an exterior wall. And something pounded on that wall. It sounded like somebody hitting it with a sledgehammer. Like I thought the wall was about to explode and something was going to come through. So it wasn't like, I don't know, a mouse in the wall or a bat in the wall or something that gets into, walls in rural areas. It was a big, it was more like the sound of a bear, which obviously isn't going to be in the wall. And then it stopped. The phenomenon stopped. Now, what was that? I don't know. I mean, it could very well have a natural explanation, but they're the type of experiences I think that a lot of people have and can shrug off. But there are some people, like, again, yourself included, and we were talking about Ken before, who do seem to have multiple experiences, And also David was, grew up in a haunted house. Yeah. So that's right. Christian, the doc is out of Kenosha. I always get those areas confused down Milwaukee way. The war, I get why I think about Walkershore. I think of that Happy Days episode, which was set in Milwaukee, of course. And the Fonz is a Christmas episode, and the Fonz doesn't have anything to do for Christmas, but he keeps pretending he's got to get the last bus to Walkershore. That's what he says, and then Richie and Mr. Cunningham find out he's really just back at his garage eating a can of cold baked beans by himself or something. So I don't know. I always think Walkershore always comes to mind whenever I think of that area. I don't know why, but yeah, thank you for correcting me, Christian. That's true. Oh, so that's where they broadcast out of, apparently. I did not. I actually didn't know that. I used to be regular on that show when it was the late night show. Now it's a Saturday, matinee type of show. I used to do regular spots on that. It's so much fun. If anybody, it's on WLIP AM. People should check it out. The Area 51 show with or Area 1051, because that's the channel's actually frequency. I think it's a great show. It's on Saturdays, I think, around midday onwards.
I used to listen to it when we first started dating. So whenever you were on, I would tune in.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I remember that.
Oh, yeah, it was a fun bit. I used to enjoy doing that show. So what other weird stuff we were talking again about demons before. Lately I've gotten into I'm a little bit late to the party because I think he's been a fairly big deal probably for 5 or more years now, but maybe even more. Mike Heiser, he's got a background. He's actually also, his background's in Wisconsin. He went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is probably one of the premier campuses in the country. And he has a PhD in like Hebrew studies and Bible studies or anything. Anyway, it's from a Christian perspective, his writings. And they're not what you ever get taught. The church today, in my experience, like particularly Protestant denominations, I don't have as much experience with Catholic or Orthodox, but they seem to steer away from supernaturalism. Like, it's funny because the very concept of a God and Christ coming to, redeem us and, save us from our sins is obviously a supernatural concept, but they don't talk. Most mainstream denominations today don't discuss an awful lot about the other world. Like, they don't really go into the weirdness that is in the Bible. And Mike Heiser points out all kinds of wonderful things. For starters, I've heard multiple pastors that I like talk about Genesis 6:1-4, which is about the sons of God finding the daughters of men, fair and coming down and essentially interbreeding with them, and then it's the mighty men of renown, or the giants in those days. Most modern denominations tend to try to dismiss that as the sons of God are really it's called the Sethite view. It means they're God's kind of people on earth, and those people bred with people who weren't really God's people. But when you read it, it's quite clear it's a supernatural passage. But it brings in, and then of course the flood immediately pretty much follows. Like, it essentially says that because of genetic interference by other spiritual beings, God decided to wipe out the impurities in a flood. But that's almost never talked about in modern Christian denominations. Like, you almost never hear the idea that there were things interacting with us and interbreeding with us in days gone by. And throughout the Old Testament, there's all kinds of interactions, including talk of the divine council. Oh, I'm glad. That's good that you teach on. It's good that you teach on that, David. I'm happy to hear that. And Ed says spirituality has been replaced by social action. It has. It's so true. And I think it's a real problem, because if all you want to do is, take care of the poor, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can do that through any type of, non-Christian organization as well. But if we ignore one of the primary themes in the Bible, and that is that there were things which were also spiritual beings interfering with us. And again, it comes back to the divine council that I was talking about. Again, that's often dismissed as, it means they were the just, Hebrews of old or something. But no, it's clear God actually is talking and working with other Elohim, that he's the highest God. But there are other Elohim, which we tend to think means God or gods, but it just means spiritual beings. There are other Elohim that were interacting with us, including what's talked about only briefly in Genesis 6, and is filled out more in the book of Enoch, that these things were very active in their interaction with us in days gone by. And today, possibly, and this is something I would have asked tonight's guest. There's the theory that the demons are the spirits of the deceased Nephilim, or the deceased giants, that they're actually not necessarily fallen angels. They're something which is a result of that perhaps interbreeding. So yeah, there's all these levels of demonology which aren't even addressed sometimes by people who do talk about demons. So angel just means messenger. According to Mike Heiser, angel doesn't mean, like, angel isn't all of God, all of the host, or all of the spiritual beings that still work with God or work against him. Angels just means the ones which are messenger. It's like a job title. It's like if you're a FedEx driver, that isn't your species. You're a human that's a FedEx driver. That's your job. And that's kind of the same capacity with angel. It means a spiritual being that works as somebody who delivers messages. So these are things which I think are just fascinating, and certainly weren't anything that I ever became aware of until I was reading more esoteric material.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the idea of the holy.
And here, David is absolutely right, if I can see it, because it's moving around. David's absolutely right. Job also mentions the divine council. So, and Psalms, it's mentioned in a few places in the Old Testament. So it's fascinating. Those things are very interesting. That there might be it might be a much more complicated spiritual realm than we're led to believe by the stock standard mega church mainstream Christianity. And that's certainly something, again, I would have asked tonight's guest. I would have liked to have asked Bishop James Long to talk about a little more. Hopefully we'll get him on sometime later and I'll be able to chat to him about those things.
Yeah, it's 35 minutes in. Yeah, I haven't heard anything.
No, I don't. I think it'll just be you and I chatting about these kind of things. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm more than happy to. Mothman 46 said, "Homo FedExes."
What?
That's pretty funny. So, what else have you been? When are we going to get another Haunted Jen episode out of you? I've started my weird library now as more content for Talking Weird. We need to get more Haunted Jen.
Yeah, I have to kind of find time.
Oh, I know.
And I don't seem to have that lately.
I know that feeling. I think that's why you just need to do a non-edited show and just chat like we were tonight. Just tell a story. 10 minutes. Because people would love to hear that. I know people would love to hear your experiences. Just do a casual. Just even record on your computer. Just press record and tell one of your stories and boom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people want to see more Haunted Jen, since we don't have a guest tonight, so I can ask these questions of the audience? People want to see more of Jen's own show?
Maybe I've not seen it. I've only done 2.
Well, that's why I'm trying to put pressure on you. I want everybody to say, yes, we want to see more Haunted Jen, and then you'll have no choice.
Yeah. I mean, I plan to get to it. It's just, single mom, 2 kids, work full time, got to take care of a house. I
know the feeling.
It's rough.
No, it is difficult. It is difficult to balancing parenting with paying bills, with doing yard work, chores, everything else. I get that. Although Talking Weird is always a nice. See, everybody wants to hear more Haunted Jen, and it's a nice question from Mothman saying, "When are either of you doing a convention or live appearance?" Thank you for asking, Mothman 46. I'd like to do something someday, for sure. We need to. Start hitting the convention circuit at some stage. Again, I think it makes it difficult because we're both the single parents who have primary placement of our children. So to get away to events can be difficult, to be honest. Not that the audience need to hear the kind of boring backstory of our daily lives, but it's true. It makes it more difficult. I am working on a book at the moment. I think when that is finally out and published, there'll probably be more of an impetus for me to actually make some more live appearance, probably than there is now, Mothman 46. But thank you for asking. So when that's done, I'll try to be out there on the circuit a little bit more. That's for sure. Who else would? This is a good question too. Are there people that you'd like to see us get on? Are there guests out there, or our regular viewers and listeners, or even non-regular viewers and listeners that you would like us to hunt down? That maybe we've had them on before and you'd like to see them again, or maybe you would like us to get somebody on we've never had on, because we do try to. I had a recommendation recently for Keith Thompson, the author of Angels and Aliens, which is, or rather Aliens and Angels, I think it's called, which is a fantastic.
Oh, really?
Book.
Oh, that's cool.
But I actually asked Keith, and he's going to do the show soon. He's a big guest. Like he's like a level of a Valet or a Harper or a Keel. I mean, his writings are fantastic.
Oh, cool.
So I'm happy. I'll always try to hunt down people. Well, I know you will as well. If somebody suggests a guest they want to see, we'll certainly reach out.
Yeah, I've got a few people in mind. I've just got to send them some, ask them. So I need to get on that, because we have some slots left open, at least for this month. And
do we? Oh, we have some more slots in June.
Mm-hmm. Don't we? 25th?
I'm sure we do.
I don't know if we have anybody there.
I know we've got somebody booked for. It's Ed Schultz next week. I'm not looking at the calendar.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic! We have Ed back, one of our favorite guests, next week.
Yeah.
I think this will make him the person who's appeared on the show most. He'll be 4.
Yes.
And Ed just actually asked. Whoops. Jeez, I'm terrible.
I think we both hit it at the same time.
Oh, that's right. I am not familiar with William V. Rorschach, Ed, but I'll look into him before we have you on next week. So that'll be a great show. Ed's always, I think Ed's going to do maybe a type of experiment as well next week. Like we've had a remote viewing experiment before with Ed. We've had a hypnosis kind of mass demonstration with Ed. So he's one of our all-time favorites. It's been way too long since we've had Ed on, actually.
Yeah.
We're also meant to have Eddie Lenahan on soon, who's one of my favorite authors, the author of The Other Crowd, and he recently wrote The Man in the Big House. He's probably done more to preserve recent memory of the fair folk and the gentry and the fairies in Ireland than anybody else. So I can't wait to have Eddie Lenahan on. I have to lock down a date with him, but he'll have to do the show. Because as anybody who watches and listens to this show knows, I could talk about The Other Crowd for the whole night. So for the next month's worth of episodes. So when we have Eddie on, I'll be able to flex that without having to feel too bad about it. Although he talks about other things in the most recent book as well. So
yeah.
What are some of your other guests you want to get, Jen? Who are people on your radar?
Well, I've been bugging you about Dakota, but I think that goes through a whole process.
We do have to get Dakota Lenahan back on. He was a fantastic guest. I will try to get him again. It does go through a process because it goes through publicists and the network and everything else. But we'll get Dakota on. I'll message him again soon, actually, and get that ball rolling.
Yeah, that would be fun.
And David says you might want to check out little LA, Missouri. Okay, I will. I'll check out. The name rings a bell, actually, David. I'll check him out for sure. Oh, I talk about.
He talks about the faith
all the time.
Every episode.
David, I don't know if
we'll have to send a certain one that you really go in depth in it.
Ranty one. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated with the fair folk. As I recently said in my most recent My Weird Library, I talked about Mactani's crypto-terrestrials, and I said I'm just as comfortable believing that it's the fair folk who present as ETs now as I am thought that they're actually coming from, millions of light years away. I think there's been an intelligence with us for a very long time, and there's multiple. Of course, what I love about talking about the fairies is it goes into all these different avenues. Like there's different theories and ideas of what they are. An anthropologist might say, well, it's just the memory of the Gaelic people. Like there were people there before the Gaels came, and there's a memory of the tribes that they conquered and drove underground. And that's the reason we think of them as that's the reason we think about them living underground. Like they literally had to disappear into the woods and hide. And that actually ties in with the more supernatural version, which is that the Tuatha De Danann, who were meant to be this race that occupied Ireland before the Gaels came from Spain. When the Gaels came from Spain, they supposedly clashed with the Tuatha De Danann, who were the older Irish not original race, because they'd taken the continent for the island from other people, supposedly, but they clashed and the Gaels won, and then the Tuatha De Danann, or there was a truce or some such, but in the end the Tuatha De Danann went underground. They either went to the old fairy forts, or they went to caverns, or they disappeared. Maybe they went to a world paralleling ours, just divided by this thin veil, and there they still exist, living simultaneously, or just next to us, just divided very slightly by this thin veil. And of course there's all kinds of stories that you don't want to bump into them in Ireland, which I find fascinating as well. It isn't that they're necessarily inimical to us, it's just that dealing with them can be dangerous. And something I'm writing at the moment, we don't have that anymore. There used to be traditions where you were told it's dangerous to deal with the others, and I'm talking particularly about fairy folk, but we could go into other traditions as well. But there's also protocols and things you should do to protect yourself, to avoid dealing with them, or if you deal with them, what you should or shouldn't do, like you shouldn't eat food with them, or you have to be polite but not too friendly. But today people aren't given these kind of warnings. So if you lived in Ireland probably even 100 years ago and you were walking home at night, you knew what to do or how to avoid. You might have carried a piece of iron because they were meant to be scared of iron, or carried, I think, a black-handled dagger with you, or there were things you did to avoid contact with them. And if you had contact, there were protocols to follow. But nobody's taught that anymore. Like if somebody's driving a back road and has an encounter with a strange light follow them, or see an ET, an extraterrestrial coming out of a saucer in a field. We're not taught how you deal with these things or how you don't deal with them. But once upon a time, there were protocols for dealing, including in the Bible, there's protocols on and warnings about dealing or not dealing with these things. So that's some of the things about the fair folk that I'm fascinated with. Of course, there's also the idea, other than the Tuatha Dé Danann belief, there's the idea that they may have been some of the fallen host from heaven. And when they realized too many, Eddie Lenahan tells a great story. Just look it up on YouTube. Search like Eddie Lenahan, Origin of Fairies, or Eddie Lenahan, Fairies in Heaven, or something. Maybe, I'm not sure what the search term would be, but the idea that the doors of heaven were opened to let Satan fall out of them, and all these other angels fell too. And then Michael said, "Oh, there's too many falling. Quickly close the doors, God." And God closed the doors, and where all the angels were is where they stayed. So the angels in heaven stayed in heaven. The angels that descended to hell were in hell, and the angels in between became the fair folk. So the ones in the waters became the fair folk who we thought lived in waters. The ones in the wood became the ones that we believed lived in the woods. And I don't actually necessarily think that's literally the origin, but it's another one of the fantastic origins. So there's all these different ideas of where these things came from or how they originated. They're all fascinating. So anyway, that's my
Yes.
I think it was David who asked for that. That's a very brief rant on what I think about the fair folk. I'm always careful too, because I think you do have to be careful with the fair folk not to say anything insulting.
Well, yeah.
That's my only superstition.
I had also read that they had mentioned, at least I was watching something about, demonology earlier, because I was going to ask some questions about that to Bishop James Long. And they were talking about, the King James version of the Bible, how he was actually a demonologist. And they had talked about these different types of, I guess, I don't know if it's a class or just the different type of entities that they show up as in forms. And one of them was the Fae, because those are the type of people or entities that are interested in sexual intercourse and what do I have down? Leading you to a demise or transporting you somewhere. So that was the actual language that it said was fairies, the fae folk.
Well, there's certainly lots in the history
Interesting.
Well, there's lots of stories in traditional fairy tales of the fair folk taking a human lover. And it can be both sexes. Like it can be that, a fairy queen or a fairy maiden sets her sights on a young mortal man, or it can be that a young woman's captured by the fairies. There's lots of tales of young women being captured by the fairies. Some of the tales of the wild hunt, which goes across a number of different cultural, supernatural traditions. So sometimes it's the Norse gods, or there's even tales of werewolves doing a wild hunt, being driven by the devil. But there was this idea in the pre-modern world that at night these things sometimes traveled across the lands in this big hunt. Like you can imagine, I suppose, people in a fox hunt, blowing horns, and going crazy and hunting through the night. And you had to make sure you lock the doors, or you barred the doors of your cabin or your hut that night. But sometimes the wild hunt would be looking for an escaped lover from fairyland. And you didn't want to get caught up in the wild hunt, because you could be taken far from where you lived. And of course, hundreds of years ago, it's not like today. If you got taken 100 miles from where you lived, who'd care? You'd get, I don't know, a greyhound, or you'd pay an Uber to drive you home or something. If you got taken hundreds of miles from where you lived 100 years ago in Ireland or in Europe or somewhere, it wasn't that easy to get home. Certainly not 200 years. It was even harder. So you didn't want to be, and sometimes you might even go just somewhere 100 miles away. You might be taken to fairyland, and then you might never see the light of day again. And if you went there, you certainly shouldn't eat anything that was offered you. If you ate anything that was offered you, you'd stay there forever. There was no coming back to the land of mortals. And of course, much like UFO
yeah.
abduction stories, there's lots of tales about time distortion. Not quite the same. Missing time in alien abduction tales usually means you can't remember what happened for a few hours. Like, I was driving and all of a sudden I was at my destination. I can't remember what happened in the 3 hours before. I was playing outside when I was a kid, and all of a sudden it was dark, and it was only 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That tends to be the type of missing time we hear about in alien abduction stories. But the older fairy distortions was that if you spent a day in fairyland, it could be like a month back here, or if you spent a week in fairyland, it could be years back here. So somebody might go to fairyland and enjoy a feast and stay there, and when they came back, it was 10 years later, and their wife had remarried because they were presumed to be dead. So, but there was this idea of time with them was different to time in the real world, and you do see some parallels in alien abduction law. There does seem to be something that happens with time.
Yeah. I would. What? I don't want to go to fairyland. Lots of time. Yeah.
I don't want to go to fairyland either. But speaking of fairyland, you have one on your wall, and I have one on my wall that I got my daughter here.
Yeah, up there.
Yeah, the map of fairyland. That's okay. Fairyland it's fascinating.
I can bring it down. Yeah, Dean bought me this.
I actually made it.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I found an old print from, I think, the early 20th century of a map of fairyland, and then I was thinking of starting to sell them. Is why I did it. They were tests for some print designs I was going to sell on the charlesfort.org site.
Oh, can you see it? Let me get the light.
Yeah, you can see that. Just a little high. There you go. That's the map of fairyland. I love the idea that there's somewhere else. And of course, that was a pretty good indication of what it looks like, though.
It's pretty neat. It's tiny, though.
Yeah, it is. Well, I would like to get it printed on something bigger, but can you imagine an even larger canvas with that on? It was pretty. Yeah, it was pretty high res, the image I had from the source that I got it from. But I do.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's nice to think there's another wonderful world which just is in parallel to ours. Of course, it mightn't have been. Thank you, Greg. It mightn't have been as wonderful as we actually think it was, because a lot of fairy tales also involve what's called glamour, is how the fairies could trick you. So you could go to what looked like a wonderful fairy castle or a fairy palace, and you might eat wonderful food, and there might be all of these beautiful, youthful fair folk. But then when the illusion vanishes, you might wake up and find yourself in a dank cave, and you were actually eating cow dung, or you found out that you saw through the illusion of the beautiful fair folk, and they actually looked old and haggard. So I love the idea that map. I mean, it has a dark side of fairyland, which looks a little scary. It has a more well-lit side of fairyland. But there's also the potential that what people saw in those encounters wasn't what it was. And that was part of what I was talking about before as well, that people were taught when they experienced this, what to expect, that you might be tricked, that the fairies might use their glamour on you. So today, though, when people see a flying saucer, say somebody sees a light in the sky and it lands and they actually see a saucer, they assume their very literal, materialistic modern view, well, that must be an extraterrestrial spacecraft. But somebody seeing something that looked wonderful in Ireland 200 years ago, a shining fairy palace, they would have known through the folklore and the traditions they were taught, this is probably not what it seems. I'm probably being tricked. This is probably fairy glamour. So they were aware that the illusions or delusions were part of interacting with this other crowd. And that's something that's forgotten today. I don't think most people who have an experience walk away going, I might have been tricked. They walk away going, I saw a silver metallic craft and there were little grey men and they told me they were from Zeta Reticuli, but they don't go, maybe they were just BSing me. Maybe that was all an illusion. But yeah, that's the irony. People 200 years ago would have questioned it more than somebody today who has an experience like that, questioned what they were showing. So we've lost a lot culturally, I think. Nobody's taught how to interact with the other today. Nobody has any idea. It's not part of our culture. We live in this very materialistic, almost deterministic, scientistic culture where the other's just totally brushed aside. And when people have experiences with it, it changes. It sometimes is a very negative experience, but negative or positive, they come away they come away again thinking that they saw something just the way it actually exists. And that might not be the case.
Yeah. Well, then there comes your missing 411 too, when you're talking about loss of time earlier.
Oh yeah, I think that's it, and that is why sometimes those type of why missing 411 makes me think more in many ways of fairy lore than modern UFO reports, because in fairy lore you could go away for a long time, or they could take you forever. Now, conceivably, there are really extraterrestrials abducting people, and I don't think they're really extraterrestrials, but maybe they are taking some people and keeping them forever. I don't know. But at least as far as the laws go, or the mythologies go around extraterrestrial belief, abductions seem to be, a relatively brief thing. You're taken and you return, unless you're who's the fire in the sky guy?
Walton.
Is Ed Walton? Is that? I should know this. Why have I drawn a blank? Is that Ed? Why have I drawn a blank for a minute? Anyway, my point is, unless you're somebody who's taken away for a week, normally in abduction law, you're taken away for a couple of hours. But in fairy law, you could be taken away forever or for a very long time. So, yeah, those missing 411 disappearances always make me think more about
Travis Walton.
Travis Walton. There you go.
I was having a blank too. I'm like, there Walton. Why can't I remember the first name?
Why don't I get Ed? Maybe because I saw
Ed.
Just
talking to Ed
just on the screen. That's why. But yeah, so I do think you're right with missing 411. It has more in common. We don't actually know what happens, but it has more in common as far as people just poofing off the map with fairy faith than it does with alien abduction. Geez, we should try to get David Paulides on sometime. That would be wonderful. To talk, but I mean, yeah, maybe down the track a little bit.
What about? Hang on a second. Weren't you going to try? I know you were talking to Eddie.
Oh yeah, Eddie Lenahan's going to come on. Eddie said he'd come on. I just have to book a time.
Okay.
I think we might have to do a pre-record on Eddie Lenahan, because I think when we do this, it's like 4 a.m. in the morning in Ireland or something. So we have to work out a time to pre-record him.
Yeah.
David says we should get Paulides. Yes, we definitely should. He'd be a great guest. But I'm really looking forward to having Eddie Lenahan on, because he is one of my favorite authors. Somebody, if you want something cool to listen to other than talking weird, people should look up Eddie Lenahan on YouTube. There's bunches of his stories and him telling old Irish folklore and him talking about the fair folk, and he has his own podcast as well. And his new book just dropped. I don't think you can get it on Amazon yet, though. We bought our copies of The Man in the Big House directly from him in Ireland. Now I think he's selling them in some stores. He might do a gradual kind of push. So I think he might sell them privately then.
Hang on, where's the light?
You got an Eddie Lenahan signature. There you go. That's why it's good. You can probably still buy them from his site. If somebody you can find Eddie Lenahan on Facebook. I'm sure it has a link. But he's almost like a modern day Brothers Grimm, like he goes out and collects the stories from older people in Ireland, and he's been doing it now for 40 years or something, maybe longer, because he's conscious that when that older generation disappear, all of this lore has gone with them. So he's gone out and done, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of interviews over the years, and has collected this data. And it's fascinating because I think his background was, I think he was doing an MA in language. So he was going out recording the way that older Irish people spoke and wrote, I believe. And then when he was talking to some old guy out on a farm in the middle of Ireland somewhere, he realized, what's more interesting than actually recording the actual way their voice, is going up or down, or the way they're, the way they use verbiage or the way they pronounce things. What's more interesting is the stories they're telling me. stories about the fair folk and old Irish folklore. So that essentially changed Eddie's life and gave us the richest modern source of Irish folklore imaginable. I mean, there's older people like Yeats, for example, who collected older Irish stories back in the 19th century, and there's other folklorists who were doing the same all throughout Europe. But in a modern capacity, there's nobody else like Eddie Lenahan. I don't think anybody out there has done what he's done over the course of the last almost half century. Just fascinating. Well, I think we've almost filled the hour, unless you want to keep chatting and have you have anything else to mention.
Not at the moment. It's popping up in my head.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who listened, and to Joe and Ed and David and Greg and everybody else who commented. Mothman 46. There was, a bunch of you. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for commenting. And next week we'll be here with Ed Schultz, who is always one of our favorite guests, and it will be a blast of a show. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until we chat to you next, keep it weird.
Keep it weird.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Until then, stay safe and keep it weird.